A quiet park in Seattle. Afternoon sunlight filters through gold leaf trees. Children are laughing in the distance. A little girl sits on a wooden bench, holding her father's hand tightly. Lily, 7, suddenly points across the path toward a woman sitting alone. Her eyes light up with a strange, sudden certainty. She whispers, then speaks out loud. "Dad, marry her." The father freezes. Daniel Hayes, 41, a single dad. He slowly looks up and sees a woman he has never met. She hears it too. She turns. Their eyes meet in the golden light, and suddenly, everything becomes very quiet. Destiny begun. The hidden truth speaks. Daniel Hayes was a man who understood the architecture of a safe life. At 41, his existence was a meticulously maintained fortress, forged in the cooling, gray embers of a previous life that had been shattered by a sudden and absolute tragedy. 5 years ago, the sun had gone out in his world when his wife Sarah passed away. Since that day, Daniel had retreated from the high-stakes, high-noise world of architectural design, where he once built monuments of glass and steel, to build a different kind of structure, a life of absolute, unyielding stability for his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. He lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Seattle, a place where the air always smelled of damp cedar, old books, and the specific metallic tang of the Pacific Northwest rain. Daniel didn't dream of skyscrapers or prestigious awards anymore. His blueprints were now drawn on the backs of napkins and school permission slips. He dreamt of perfectly packed school lunches, flawlessly executed science projects, and the specific rhythmic sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through the hallways. To the outside world, he was the model of a dedicated father, a man who had sacrificed his ambition for his child's peace. But inside the quiet sanctuary of his own mind, Daniel was a ghost haunting the halls of his own life. He had become an expert at the logistics of survival, but he had forgotten how to live. His life was defined by a rigid protective discipline that bordered on the clinical. He was the father who was always exactly 5 minutes early to the school bus stop, standing in the same spot with a thermos of hot cocoa. He was the man who had memorized every single ingredient in the local bakery's inventory just to ensure Lily's safety. He was the anchor in her world, but in the process of becoming a shield, he had become a statue. Daniel avoided the world of dating with a calculated precision. He viewed relationships not as opportunities for joy or companionship, but as volatile variables that could introduce instability into Lily's fragile heart. He was terrified of change, terrified of a new person disrupting the delicate, brittle peace they had built. And most of all, he was terrified of reopening the emotional wounds that he had spent half a decade trying to cauterize with routine. To Daniel, love was a risk he could no longer afford to take. Lily, however, was a child of remarkable, almost unsettling observation and unfiltered honesty. She had inherited her mother's sparkling, mischievous eyes and her father's quiet, analytical mind. While Daniel saw their life as complete and safe, Lily saw it as silent. She noticed the way other kids had 2 hands to hold during the walk to school, a father on one side, a mother on the other. She noticed the way their house felt a little too large and a little too cold during the long, dark Seattle winter nights. She didn't have the sophisticated words to describe loneliness or emotional stagnation, but she felt the gaps in the air where a mother's voice used to be. Lily loved her father with a fierce, protective devotion, but she also sensed the heavy gray weight he carried in his silence. She saw him staring at the empty chair during dinner. She saw him touch his wedding ring when he thought she was focused on her homework. To Lily, the world was still a place of endless, vibrant possibilities, and she was waiting for a sign that her father was ready to see the colors again. She was the one who noticed the things he tried to hide, the one who understood that a fortress is only a prison if you never open the doors. Their daily routine was a sacred, non-negotiable cycle. Every afternoon, regardless of the weather, they would walk to the park, a lush green sanctuary nestled between the gray urban sprawl and the deep blue of the Sound. Daniel would sit on the same wooden bench, his posture stiff and prepared, watching Lily conquer the jungle gym with the focus of a professional athlete. He would bring a book on structural integrity or a notepad for work, but mostly he just watched her. He was waiting for her to grow up, waiting for the time to pass, believing that if he could just keep things exactly as they were, nothing would ever hurt them again. He was building a life that was functionally perfect, but spiritually hollow. He didn't realize that in his effort to protect her from the storm, he was also keeping her trapped in the dark. On this particular Tuesday, the air was uncharacteristically warm for a Seattle spring, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine and salt. The park was a watercolor of activity, the distant hum of traffic on I-5, the frantic barking of dogs, and the rhythmic, hollow thud of a basketball on a nearby court. Daniel felt a rare, fleeting moment of relaxation, his shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch as he held Lily's small, warm hand on the bench. He felt successful. He had managed another day. He had kept her safe. He had maintained the structure. But as the afternoon sun hit a specific golden angle, casting long, dancing shadows across the path, the structure was about to face a force it hadn't accounted for. The intuition of a child who saw a future in a single glance. The park was a bustling watercolor of movement, but Lily's focus had drifted away from the swings and the slides she usually loved. She was staring intently across the paved path toward a solitary figure, sitting on a low stone wall beneath the sweeping branches of a weeping willow. It was a woman, dressed in a simple, elegant trench coat, her head bowed over the pages of a thick, hardcover book. She looked like a part of the landscape, calm, elegant, and entirely self-contained. This was Elena Voss. At 32, Elena was a woman who had recently arrived in Seattle, fleeing the loud, exhausting noise of a high-pressure corporate life in Chicago that had left her feeling emotionally bankrupt. She was independent, successful in her own right, but she carried a quiet, resonant loneliness that she masked with a reserved, almost clinical exterior. She had moved to the city for a fresh start, a way to redefine herself away from the expectations of others. But so far, her new start had mostly consisted of empty apartments, long walks in a city that didn't know her name, and books that served as her only companions. She was a woman waiting for a story to begin, but she was too afraid to write the first line herself. Lily watched Elena for several minutes, her small head tilted in deep concentration, as if she were solving a complex puzzle. She saw the way Elena tucked a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. She saw the way the woman looked up at the swaying trees with a faint, sad smile before returning to her reading. In that moment, Lily didn't see a stranger. She saw a match. She saw the missing piece of the puzzle she had been carrying in her pocket for 5 long years. It wasn't logic. It was a soul recognizing its counterpart. With a sudden electric energy that made Daniel jump, Lily's small hand shot out, pointing directly at Elena. Her voice, usually soft and careful to follow her father's rules, rang out across the quiet path with the absolute authority of a judge delivering a verdict. "Dad, marry her." Daniel Hayes felt the air leave his lungs as if he had been struck by a physical blow to the solar plexus. He didn't just freeze. He felt the entire world stop spinning on its axis. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, terrified drumbeat that he hadn't felt since the day Sarah was rushed to the emergency room. He looked at the woman Lily was pointing at, then back at his daughter, his face flushing a deep, burning crimson that spread to his neck. He was a man of logic, of blueprints and stress loads, and this was the ultimate failure of every protocol he had ever designed. "Lily, we don't—" "Please, sweetheart, put your hand down," Daniel hissed, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper. He tried to pull her hand back, but Lily was unyielding, her arm like a rod of iron. She didn't understand the social cost. She didn't care about the etiquette of the elite or the embarrassment of her father. She only understood the sudden, overwhelming feeling of rightness in her chest. Elena Voss had heard it. It was impossible not to. In the quiet lull of the afternoon, the words had cut through the air like a clear silver bell. She looked up from her book, her eyes wide with a combination of shock and a sudden, sharp vulnerability. She saw the little girl pointing at her with a look of pure, unadulterated hope. And she saw the man beside her, a man who looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. She saw his worn jacket, his kind but tired eyes, and the way he was currently trying to negotiate with a 7-year-old's unfiltered honesty. The silence that followed was heavy, textured, and agonizingly long. It was the kind of silence that changes the atoms in a room. People on nearby benches glanced over, some smirking into their coffee cups, others watching with a curious, predatory intensity. Daniel felt the judgment of the crowd, the weight of his own profound embarrassment, and the terrifying realization that his safe life had just been publicly and irrevocably dismantled by the person he loved most. I am so incredibly sorry, Daniel managed to choke out, finally forcing himself to stand up. He took a hesitant, stumbling step toward Elena, his hands held out in a gesture of frantic apology. She doesn't have a filter yet. I'm so sorry if she made you uncomfortable. We'll go. We're leaving now. Elena didn't look offended. As she processed the man's genuine panic and the girl's radiant, hopeful face, her own reserved corporate exterior began to crack, falling away like dry plaster. She saw a hero in the man, a father who was clearly drowning in his own sense of duty and grief, and she saw a kindred spirit in the girl. Elena offered a small, hesitant smile, the first real, unscripted smile she had given anyone since she arrived in the city. It's okay, Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady, melodic, and warm. It's actually quite the compliment. I think it's the best proposal I've had in at least a decade. Lily didn't let up. She saw the smile and sensed the opening. She stepped forward, ignoring her father's attempt to lead her away by the hand. She looks kind, Dad, Lily said, her voice now softer, but just as certain. And she looks like she's waiting for us. Don't go yet. The park isn't finished. That line landed deeper than any of them expected. It hit Daniel with the force of a buried memory. It hit Elena with the weight of her own quiet loneliness. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated human connection, triggered by a child who didn't know the rules of the world, but knew the secret rules of the heart. The park was still noisy, the city was still moving, but in that small circle beneath the weeping willow, the silence was no longer awkward. It was a sanctuary. Daniel expected Elena to gather her things and walk away, to seek the safety of the crowd and forget the strange encounter. That was what normal people did in the world he had designed. But Elena didn't move. She stayed on the stone wall, her book resting in her lap, her gaze fixed on Lily with a gentleness that felt like a physical touch. There was a curiosity in her eyes that bypassed all of Daniel's social barriers. She realized that for the first time since moving to Seattle, someone had actually seen her. Not as a customer, a neighbor, or a professional demographic, but as a person who might actually belong at a table. I'm Elena, she said, her voice carrying a soft, melodic quality that seemed to harmonize perfectly with the wind in the willows. Daniel hesitated, his hand still hovering near Lily's shoulder. Every instinct he had built over the last 5 years told him to run, to retreat to the fortress and double the guards. He told himself that this was dangerous, that Lily was getting too close to a fire that would eventually go out and leave them colder than before. But he looked at his daughter, who was watching him with a look of absolute, unshakable faith. He realized that if he walked away now, he wasn't just rejecting a stranger. He was rejecting his daughter's first real attempt to reach out to the world. Daniel took a slow, deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs for the first time in years. He sat back down on the very edge of his bench. I'm Daniel, and this is Lily, the world's most efficient and currently most embarrassing matchmaker. Lily didn't waste any more time. She hopped off the bench and walked over to Elena, sitting directly on the grass at her feet. What are you reading? She asked, her voice full of a child's innocent, unshielded interest. The conversation began simply enough. They talked about the park, the weather, and the specific haunting beauty of the Seattle skyline during the blue hour. But as the minutes turned into a full hour, the superficial layers of their lives began to melt away. Elena noticed the way Daniel spoke, the calm, grounded weight of his words, and the way his entire posture shifted when he addressed his daughter. He was a man of profound presence, a man who had clearly been through a massive fire and come out made of hardened iron, yet remained remarkably soft for his child. Daniel, in turn, noticed the quiet sadness that Elena tried so hard to hide behind her professional smiles. He saw the way she looked at Lily, not with the pity of a stranger, but with a deep, aching nostalgia for a life she hadn't yet found. He saw her distance from others, and the way she seemed to be holding her breath, as if she were waiting for a permission she hadn't yet received to join the world again. Twist 1. The hidden truth. As the shadows lengthened across the path, Elena found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years. She told them the real reason she was sitting alone in a park on a Tuesday. She had moved to the city after a long-term relationship had ended, not with a dramatic bang, but with the slow, agonizing realization that she was just a supporting character in someone else's success. She had been the one who sacrificed her own dreams to build someone else's empire, only to find herself replaced when the empire was finally completed. "I moved here to find out who I am when I'm not the partner," Elena admitted, her voice dropping to a vulnerable, shaky whisper. "But I've spent the last 3 months realizing that finding yourself is much harder when you're the only person in the room. I've become very good at being alone, but I'm not sure I'm good at being real anymore. I think I've built a cage and called it freedom." Daniel listened with a stillness that was both comforting and terrifyingly honest. He didn't offer a cliché about time healing all wounds. He didn't try to fix her history with an architectural solution. He simply sat with the weight of it, acknowledging its presence. Twist 2. The shared scar. Driven by a sudden surge of honesty he couldn't explain, Daniel shared a piece of his own truth, a story he rarely told anyone outside the 4 walls of his house. He talked about Sarah not as a tragedy to be avoided, but as a masterpiece that had been cut short. He described the years after her death as a long, gray winter, where he had focused entirely on keeping Lily's world warm, forgetting that his own world was freezing over. "I built a life around her because I was afraid that if I looked at anything else, I'd lose the memory of what I had," Daniel said softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I thought that being a good father meant being a solid, windowless wall. But today, Lily showed me that maybe a wall isn't what she needs. Maybe she needs a door, or at least a view of the sun." Lily looked up from the grass, her eyes bright with a wisdom far beyond her 7 years. "My dad is a hero," she told Elena with absolute certainty. "He fixes everything, even my broken dolls that the dog chewed, and he makes the best pancakes in the entire world, even if they're sometimes a little black on the edges." Elena laughed, a genuine resonant sound that seemed to chase the last of the gray from the air. "Pancakes are a very important skill, Lily. I think that might be better than any architectural degree from Harvard." The emotional shift in the small circle was palpable. They were no longer 3 strangers sitting in a park. They were 3 souls who had recognized the matching scars on each other. The awkwardness had been replaced by a heavy, beautiful resonance. Elena realized that Daniel wasn't just a single dad. He was a man of immense integrity, depth, and soul. And Daniel realized that Elena wasn't just a stranger. She was a woman who was brave enough to admit she was lost in the same woods as him. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and violent violet, the interaction felt like a small, quiet miracle. Lily sat between them now, her hand firmly in Daniel's and her other hand resting near Elena's on the stone wall. The safe life Daniel had worked so hard to maintain had been breached, but for the first time in 5 years, he didn't feel afraid of the intrusion. He felt like he was finally starting to breathe the same air as the rest of humanity. He realized that Lily hadn't just pointed at a stranger, she had pointed at a future he had been too terrified to even imagine. The afternoon had turned into a cool, crisp evening. The park was slowly emptying, the shadows of the old trees stretching across the grass like long, dark fingers reaching for the city. Elena stood up, gently brushing the grass and dust from her trench coat. The spell of the afternoon was beginning to fade, replaced by the cold reality of the coming night and the empty apartment that waited for her. Elena looked at her watch, the old ingrained habit of the corporate refugee, and then back at Daniel. "I should probably let you 2 get to your dinner," Elena said, her voice carrying a hint of the old reserved distance, as if she were trying to protect herself from the end of the moment. It was Truly wonderful meeting you, Lily. You're a very special girl. And you too, Daniel. Thank you for the conversation and the apology. She turned to walk away, her figure becoming a silhouette against the streetlights. Daniel felt a familiar, cold instinct rising in his chest. The powerful urge to give a polite goodbye, offer a standard take care, and retreat back to the safety of his apartment and his predictable routine. He could let her go. He could go home, make a normal dinner, and pretend that the afternoon had just been a strange, funny anomaly to tell his sister about. He could stay safe. He could keep the fortress intact. But as he took his first step toward the park exit, he felt a sharp, sudden tug on his sleeve. Lily wasn't moving. She was standing her ground on the path, her small face set in a look of profound, desperate determination that Daniel had only seen a few times in her life. She looked at her father, her eyes shimmering with the hot, stinging tears of a realization she couldn't fully explain to an adult mind. "Dad," Lily whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Don't let her go. If she walks away now, the quiet is going to come back. The gray is going to come back. Please, Dad, don't let her be another ghost." The line hit Daniel with the force of a physical blow to the heart. He looked at Elena's retreating back, a lone figure moving toward the indifferent city lights. He thought about the empty chair at their dinner table. He thought about the years of silence he had called stability. He realized that Lily was right. The greatest danger to their life wasn't the presence of a new person, it was the continued absence of one. If small moments can change everything, type, "I believe in them." Daniel didn't overthink it. For the first time in a decade, he let go of the logic, the blueprints, and the fear of structural failure. He took a step forward, his voice clear, resonant, and strong, cutting through the low hum of the evening traffic. "Elena!" She stopped and turned, her face framed by the glowing street lamps. Daniel walked up to her, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird finally finding an open window. He didn't use a practiced line or a clever joke. He didn't offer a grand declaration. He just offered the simple, messy truth. "We're having those pancakes Lily mentioned," Daniel said, a small, genuine smile finally reaching his eyes and staying there. "They're not exactly a 4-star meal, and the kitchen is usually a total disaster afterward. But we'd really like it if you joined us. No pressure, no expectations of anything. Just dinner. With people who are glad you stayed." Elena froze. She looked at Daniel, then at the little girl who was now waving frantically from the middle of the path. She felt the cold Seattle air filling her lungs and clearing the last of her doubt. She realized that she had been waiting for a miracle to save her from her own loneliness, not realizing that the miracle was a man in a worn jacket and a girl with messy hair and a giant heart. "I'd love to have pancakes, Daniel," Elena whispered. The silence that followed was the most important one of Daniel's life. It was the moment the architecture of his world shifted permanently from a fortress to a home. He realized that being a father wasn't just about building walls to keep the world out. It was about knowing exactly when to open the door and let the light in. He reached out his hand, not to close a business deal, but to start a real story. Elena's yes wasn't about a romantic spark or a cinematic destiny. It was a simpler, more profound response to a basic human need, the need to be invited. She joined them that night, sitting at the cluttered wooden table in Daniel's kitchen, surrounded by Lily's drawings and the warm, comforting smell of sizzling batter. It wasn't a perfect evening. The pancakes were slightly burned on the edges, the syrup bottle was sticky, and Lily spilled her orange juice twice. But the atmosphere was unrecognizable from the cold, polished silence of Elena's previous life. Daniel watched her. He saw the way she laughed with Lily, the way she asked genuine questions about the drawings on the fridge, and the way she seemed to fill the room with a new, vibrant energy that the house had been starving for. He realized that the miracle Lily had seen in the park wasn't for her, it was for him. He was no longer a ghost in his own house. He was a man sitting at a table with people who had chosen to be there. He realized that sometimes the best blueprints are the ones you draw together as you go. Final scene, 3 days later, the same quiet park in Seattle. The sun is setting again, casting a golden, divine glow through the trees. Three people are sitting on the same wooden bench where the story began. There is no awkwardness. There are no frantic pointing gestures. There is only presence. Daniel is reading a book, Elena is sketching in a new notebook Lily gave her, and Lily is sitting between them, her small hands holding both of theirs. Lily looks up at the sky, then at her father. She doesn't say a word. She just smiles, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph and peace she had known all along. Final voiceover ending. She pointed at a stranger without knowing her name, her history, or her bank balance. She didn't check for red flags or social status. She just saw a heart that looked like it needed a home. And sometimes, in a world full of complex logistics, guarded hearts, and heavy walls, the most honest and life-changing decisions come from the smallest, bravest voices. Lily Hayes didn't just find a stranger. She found a future, because she was the only one in the park who wasn't afraid to see the truth. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Chip Healing Stories. And tell me, would you have listened to the little girl?